First tonight, Iranian state media have reported fresh explosions in Tehran in the early hours of today. It follows warnings from Israel for residents of the northeastern parts of the city to leave their homes. Iran also launched waves of missiles in response to the Israeli attacks, setting off air raid alerts in parts of central and northern Israel and wounding dozens of people. Meanwhile, President Trump left the G7 summit in Canada early because of the crisis in the Middle East. He returned to Washington, where he's been attending a meeting of his Security Council, among what the president called other big stuff that he's got to do. But officials say the U.S. is not joining the Israeli offensive on Iran.
You just posted right before we took off that you're not leaving because of a ceasefire. Why are you? Can you elaborate?
Get it better than a ceasefire. We're not looking for a ceasefire. I didn't say I was looking for a ceasefire. That was Emmanuel, nice guy, but he doesn't get it right too often. But we're not looking. We're looking for better than a ceasefire.
What specifically is better than a ceasefire? What are you looking for here?
An end. A real end, not a ceasefire. An end.
So something that would be permanent.
Yeah, or giving up entirely. That's okay too.
Regime change is not an objective of this war. It can be a result, but it's not an objective we put to ourselves in this war. We knew when we decided on Thursday night this historic decision that we will face damages, that we will face casualties, but we also knew that there is a price not taking that decision. And that decision was taken in the last possible moment, a decision which is crucial to ensure the future and the security of the State of Israel. Gradually, first, we cut the hands of the octopus when we dealt with Hamas and Hezbollah. Now we are dealing with the head of the octopus. We are dealing with the most significant threats, and there are the ballistic threats and the nuclear threat, and those threats are combined with their allies to the Iranian axis. And while we are taking this operation, we are no doubt getting a progress in achieving.
Well, that's the Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Saar, and before him, Donald Trump. In another development, Israel says it's killed a top Iranian military commander. The Israeli military says Ali Shamkhani was targeted in a strike on central Tehran. He was close to Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei. Correspondents say the killing would have taken significant intelligence and could suggest Israel may have penetrated Iran's security forces.
Last night, based on precise intelligence received from the Intelligence Directorate, we eliminated Ali Shadmani, the Chief of Staff of War, the highest-ranking military commander of the Iranian regime. He was eliminated in the headquarters of the Iranian regime in the heart of Tehran. Shadmani served as Chief of Staff of the Iranian Armed Forces and was the closest person to Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei.
Meanwhile, an Israeli airstrike has struck an Iranian television station as it was live on air. The presenter ducks from shot as the screen goes blank. It's not clear how many people were inside the building when the attack happened or how many were injured or died. Israel said they were told to evacuate the area. Take a look. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now on the line from London by the international affairs analyst, Dr. Marek Laskiewicz. Dr. Laskiewicz, good to see you again. Let's just start with, obviously, the Iran-Israel conflict and where exactly you think that leaves the United States, which is Israel's biggest ally. I wonder if you think the Trump administration can avoid getting dragged into whatever comes next.
It all hinges upon Iranian military capabilities. If Israel can handle Iran by itself, America won't go in. But if Iran, it turns out, cannot be so handled, if Iran carries on developing its nuclear facilities, because of course some of its laboratories and so on are underground, then America may well get involved.
So, I mean, if you were to sum it up at this point, I mean, does it look like President Trump isn't quite ready to rein in Israel's military campaign, but is instead looking to find a way to create leverage, if you like, to cause Iran to make concessions that could lead to an end to this war?
Yes, precisely. That is indeed. He's looking for Israel to, in effect, try to force Iran to the negotiating table to abandon its nuclear ambitions. And this is, in fact, the key, if you like, objective of the war. A partial success would be simply the degrading of Iranian nuclear facilities and personnel to the point where Iran cannot develop a nuclear weapon. However, even if this were to be attained, it would only be a temporary solution. And so the real solution lies in the eventual negotiating table. And it is, as you stated, America presumably is hoping that Israel will force Iran to make the key concession about not developing nuclear weapons.
And along those lines, I mean, there are reports that Mr. Trump left the G7 summit early to try to find some kind of diplomatic path to end these hostilities. I mean, are there countries in the region and beyond that he might turn to who have sort of built a kind of détente, if you like, with Iran in recent years and who might be able to broker a ceasefire?
I think it's more complicated than that, judging by everything said. President Donald Trump left G7 for two reasons. First of all, like NATO, it's of no importance to him. He doesn't rate it. He doesn't see it as necessary. And in effect, by so leaving right now the G7, he has shown up G7 to be absolutely a second-rate institution like NATO now is, or for that matter, EU on the world stage. And it simply shows that is, if you like, his contempt for that. But simultaneously, and this is more an echo of what you're stating, he is running his own diplomatic show. He believes he can do better by himself because he presumably disliked always negotiating as a team. And in doing so, he is in fact turning to, there is reputedly a call made by President Putin to Iran to try and get Iran back to the negotiating table. And this would fit in with the fact that Putin would like to be seen as a mediator and instantly get his hands on all the enriched uranium. That is what he also said he was prepared to do, which is very nice of him, of course, except it means that Russian nuclear facilities will be improved by it, which is, of course, a negative point. But simultaneously, please note, President Donald Trump stated that the G7 should never have got rid of Russia. He said Trudeau and Obama did this. This is not true. Actually, all G7 got rid of this eighth member. But the point is, as he sees it, G7 no longer is of particular importance. Much more important is this link, incidentally, to Russia. And in your preamble before, you stated the G7 represents the major economies. Well, it doesn't anymore, because China and India are, of course, equally important now. And for that matter, Russia, of course, is one of the BRICS, and you could add in Brazil too. So G7 is, in that sense, an outdated institution. He doesn't feel any need for it. That's why he left. I believe he's now doing something with Putin.
And I mean, we heard Prime Minister Netanyahu saying Israel is not ready for a ceasefire. On the other hand, we heard President Trump saying that Iran should negotiate a deal. I mean, does Mr. Trump still have much influence over what is happening at the moment? Is Israel still listening to him?
That is indeed a key question. The strike which they made on Iran ahead of talks with America can be interpreted two ways. First and foremost, it really shows up Donald Trump as, if you like, a paper tiger. Israel just doing what it wants. But there is an alternative, if you like, explanation. Israel told Donald Trump about it, and he was in on this tricking of Iran so that Israel can make a strike. Actually, it's not unusual in politics to have someone doing the attacks, and for somebody else, if you like, the standard story of the hard man and the nice man, that Donald Trump's playing the nice man here and Israel the hard man, in which case that would suggest the latter explanation is correct and they are actually working hand in glove.
Well, that's a very, very interesting analysis. So is it fair to say that while President Trump seemed to have preferred diplomacy over the use of force, he's now trying to use the use of force by Israel to achieve diplomatic ends?
Quite right. And that would mean that in this explanation, as I've offered, Israel is in fact part of the whole negotiating process, if you like. It is the hammer, and he is the nice guy to try and seal it. And that therefore, in this respect, without America getting its hands dirty, without America having to bomb anyone, with all the negative publicity and the fallout and the backblow that causes, he may well get his way. I think myself that this is the explanation for these events.
What do you think, Dr. Laskiewicz, is the biggest risk to the US with this conflict? I mean, is it that this war could widen beyond Israel and Iran to include attacks, for instance, on American bases in Gulf countries as the stakes get higher for Iran and the war drags on?
In my opinion, Iran won't attack American bases because it's pointless bringing in yet another enemy. It has its hands full just dealing with Israel. And more interesting is whether Iran could find any allies. And it does appear to be unlikely. The key one would be President Putin, because after Iran has supplied him with drones, they are cross-linked to some degree. And yet President Putin is calling for mediation and for a ceasefire. In other words, he is on the side of Donald Trump and therefore not on Iran's side as such. Therefore, I don't think this war is going to escalate easily unless President Putin changes his mind, unless Iran decides upon a more suicidal strategy of trying to attack the Americans and so find other Arabs on its side. I think both of those are unlikely, and therefore I do not believe the war will escalate in that way.
And I mean, you mentioned the G7 earlier. What do you make of the G7 countries asserting Israel's right to defend itself when many in the Middle East believe that it is Israel, not Iran, who is the aggressor in this instance?
Well, technically Israel is the aggressor, and you're quite right in saying that many of the Arab countries are on Iran's side in that respect. They're not fully on Iran's side, but certainly they do see along those lines you've stated. The central problem with G7 is that without America, it is toothless, it is second rate. Russia is more important, China is more important. And I think that's why Donald Trump, if he is negotiating with Putin, as would appear to be the case on this Iran issue, has already seen that it's much more important to go with BRICS nations rather than stay with this old. Well, that's what the G7 is. It's the old powers, is it not? I think, personally, he could have done an awful lot. There was a communique issued about Iran, but he could have done far more with the G7. But what is quite clear, absolutely clear, is G7 is not irrelevant, but it's also clear the Arabs, although they have stated some support for Iran, are not likely to actually come on Iran's side formally.
And before we go, we've heard Prime Minister Netanyahu claiming that Israel's attacks have exposed the weakness of the Iranian regime. Has it, in your assessment?
Yes, but that was known before. The Iranian regime has, of course, been trying to develop some sort of, if you like, defenses over the years, but they have significantly failed to do so quite often. It's not primary power, and therefore what Israel has simply shown us what everybody else believed, anyway, that is a second-rate military nation as things stand. However, there is one sting in the tail possible here. Nations, when attacked, tend to develop their forces. One of the forces that they are developing, is, for example, of this is Ukraine, which when Russia went in was unquestionably a third-rate power and now is holding Russia in many areas. Likewise, Iran. It is possible this war may well actually bring Iran's military capabilities to the fore. This may sound paradoxical, but short-term victories don't always lead to long-term victories. Witness Germany rolling Russia all the way up to Moscow, only to find it losing World War II afterwards. And therefore, it is by no means clear Iran is out for the count.
Very interesting indeed, and thank you ever for that analysis. Dr. Marek Laskiewicz is the international affairs analyst. He was talking to me on the line there from London.